Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? In the back? Yeah. Well, welcome. My name is Alexey Surkov, and welcome to our panel. I'll introduce myself and kick it off, and then have the rest of the panelists introduce themselves as well. I'm a partner at Deloitte. Been with the firm for almost 25 years. Have done a variety of different things, from models to quantitative things to governance, and technology and so on. And probably the most exciting thing that I've been doing over the past couple of years is focusing on governance, controls, risk compliance around AI, a topic that we in our firm call trustworthy AI. And so probably one of the most interesting things that I've been kind of engaged in my whole career, and look forward to the conversation today. Ben, why don't you go next?
Hi, guys. Again, there we go. Good to see everybody. Ben Vinzant. If you didn't see general session earlier, I did a little intro there, so I won't waste too much time, but Chief Data Analytics Officer at Citizens Bank, and have been working in financial services and various data and analytics functions for not quite 20 years now, so been doing this for a little while.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rodrigo Salvaterra. I work for JP Morgan Chase. I am the head of strategic equities. So what I do is basically build the vision for the company. The next 10, 15, 20 years, we do retire the legacy applications. We have a suite of more than 5,000 business applications that are currently running. Some of them were built in the 80s. So as we can see, they stay for a long time, so we try to retire them and build the future for the next 20 years. I started my career at a very young age, 13 years old, doing technology and AI as well, 20 years almost with banking industry. So yeah, here we go.
Hi, I'm Robin Nunn. I'm going to scream into this microphone since I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing folks on the other end. But I am a lawyer. I am a partner at Morgan, Lewis & Bockius. I'm based in DC and New York. I am head of the banking industry group, which essentially means that I do a lot of work with respect to transactions and litigations and investigations in all sorts of areas involving financial institutions and non-financial institutions, whether it's in artificial intelligence or machine learning or, autonomous cars. I'm not going to give you any years on the number of years I've practiced law because that will age me, but I can say that I have been at my firm for a number of years. I've worked in-house at American Express and Capital One, and I really love all things financial services. Thanks to you all for being here. Thanks to AI4 for hosting this panel, and thanks to my co-panelists for joining me. I think we're going to have a lot of fun in the next 30 minutes and look forward to your questions at the end.
Thanks, thank you, Robin and all. Well, let's just get going. So let's start with something fairly straightforward, and maybe talk about just the general state of AI adoption in banking. What are some of the businesses? What are some of the functional areas where we see the most growth in AI over the past few years? Ben, do you want to kick us off?
So. Couple of things on that front. I think artificial intelligence in banking is sort of known in the risk and fraud space. I mentioned this a little bit this morning. What I am starting to see now that is really exciting, and again, happy to make this as interactive as you guys would like, is that in particularly my prior place, there was artificial intelligence cropping up everywhere. So rather than in sort of a niche use case, what was starting to evolve is more how do we use machine learning in particular. I'm using AI in kind of that broad sort of academic sense. But how do we use machine learning to optimize everything? So whether it's, in my case, it was things like sales behaviors or staffing or leads, what have you. Each of those things we use to sort of use logic and a little bit of data-driven performance to look at Now we started kind of building algorithms into the entirety of that string, and it printed money. And so based on some of those use cases, we're starting to see it just everywhere. I think also of like the machine learning and operations kind of stuff, a lot of automation. So really it's more that it's becoming endemic as opposed to in specific niches. I don't know if there's anything.
Yeah, I've been doing this for a long time, and then I saw this transformation. When we talk about strategy and long-term vision, we always have to look at what the current state of our technology, right? And a couple of years ago, we didn't talk about AI. We didn't talk about many other things. And now there's no way to not talk about AI, to not include in the vision and the strategy. And the reasons, I mean, we can spend all day discussing. One is to be in front of the competitors, be ahead. But there's, like Ben said, clear rewards. There are clear benefits in terms of profits, right? So the banking industry, as you all know, always dealt with algorithms, especially on algo trading, right? Building models, quantitative models to find patterns and make money. So those were the clear goals, and that's where the business were always looking forward to make profits, quick profits. You build a model, and then a couple of minutes, you had something to start cashing in. But now, it's everywhere. So we have vertical strategies, we have horizontal strategies in which you have AI personnel in all different operations, HR, finance, and so on. So the transformation that we see now, it's absolutely a huge change. So it's growing exponentially, and I don't think there's any turning back.
Yeah, I would echo exactly what Ben and Rodrigo have said. AI is really permeating through all businesses that I work with and all products and services. I see it a lot in marketing and advertising, as well as in anti-sort of fraud, anti-money laundering sorts of efforts, along with cybersecurity response and lending. I think the question was in terms of where we thought the most was. I'm a little biased based on what I do. I work with a lot of consumer financial services, but I see it most often in my day-to-day in terms of the consumer lending areas. I think a lot of banks are moving away from the sort of legacy traditional credit bureau pulls and models and really attempting to use alternative resources and alternative, sort of machine learning programs in this space. So that's where really the department that I'm getting the most questions and seeing the most push in this area. Not to say that the others, aren't also growing, but on my desk, that's where I'm really seeing it.
Just out of curiosity, a little audience participation. How many people here from financial services firms? Okay, keep your hands up if you're on the consumer side. Markets businesses? Insurance? Yeah, okay, so just, it's marketing, by the way. Ops. Yeah, ops. Anyway, so it's as evidenced by.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. Is it just a retail story, or is it a wholesale story as well at banks? And I think it is becoming more and more a wholesale story as well, right? Do you want to?
Yeah, no, definitely. So in terms of how do we evolve going forward, so in terms of team structure, right, this is something that we talk about a lot. Do we want a AI person on each and every department? Do we want a segregated, separate AI structure in which it's basically a factory? You hand over requirements and they come back with the final product. I believe in a hybrid model in which you have someone in each area fostering, fomenting, and making sure that AI conversation is there, but you also have specialized teams that do the hardcore, do the difficult job of translating requirements into solutions, right? And I think we're going to talk a little bit about the dynamics as well, in terms of how do we bridge those two teams.
Well, on that point, actually, let's talk a little bit about the what it actually takes to get something like that going, right? And there's a view that it really requires very close collaboration between the data science teams and the businesses, and how to engineer that within the context of an organization is an interesting question that we're all trying to solve, right? So I don't know, Ben, if you want to get us started.
Sure. So I mentioned earlier, again, past life, we stood up that function, the sales science function, and I don't ever give enough credit to my partner organizations, and should, so I'll start now with a microphone in my hand with a group full of folks from the industry, to just say there would have been no impact from what we built if it wasn't adopted in the field, right? And so part of the magic of and impact of what we were able to build there was co-developing it with folks that weren't technical, co-developing it with folks that were going to be making these decisions and looking at the outcomes, and actually were able to coach us on the quality of our recommendations. In a number of cases, they were absolute trash, even though the math was good, the data was bad. Dumpster fire. So that's a lesson I've learned with a little bit of scar tissue. But I would say that's absolutely been my experience, is that as you're trying to embed artificial intelligence into all of these different business functions, particularly in places that are not used to having that be part of the operating model, like a digital organization or like a heavily in algo trading platform, those sorts of environments, really bringing people into the problem has been kind of the only tool I've had. It slows things down a little bit, but it means that on the back end of that development, you can write checks against the impact of what you're developing, as opposed to having a really nifty tool that nobody uses and collects dust on a shelf somewhere.
Well, let me pick up on that for a second. So, let's pretend we're trying to start a new initiative from scratch, and we live in this ideal world where we can actually do it from scratch without having to deal with legacy and where we came from and all of that. So, what would be an ideal way to structure that sort of collaboration? Rodrigo, you want to?
Yeah, I would say, obviously, what comes to mind, the most obvious answer is team structure. How do you have a governance in place that makes things run more smoothly, but also brings that collaboration as much as possible? But you also need a bridge, and that bridge is someone that is skilled, and the person has to be willing to connect people, right? So if we think about any team structure, right? You have two separate teams, operations and business, you have finance and HR. They're completely different. But we have a special case in here because data science and business, they're completely different. Like, they're super different. So they're hyper specialized. They won't understand each other very well. And we're talking about a novelty, something that's really new. In other cases, when you have different functional areas, you have some level of basic understanding. But how do you bridge those different teams is sometimes a challenge. And in my experience, the way we solve that, or at least help them to connect, is you have one person, maybe a few people that can actually talk to both teams. They can, aggregate them. It could be different ways, just having an event, having meetings, but having someone that can understand both sides, because you always have people that won't understand or they don't need to understand the details, but they want to understand the high level. So if you have those people talking together, I think that helps a lot.
I'm a big fan of having, and this is obviously best practices from the lawyer on the panel, having an AI risk officer, having some accountability, making sure that you're being consistent with your policies and procedures that you hopefully have around this, that you're doing AI ethics training, that you're going through a fairly robust process as you make product offerings that surround AI. Obviously, we're all from very diverse companies here in this room, so there's no one size fits all, but I would just be very careful that you're following the documentation that you have, because that's what's going to be possibly used against you if you're not following your own rules.
So, Robin, Alexey, if you guys don't mind, just off script, I'm curious to get your guys' perspective on, you talked about trustworthiness and controls and so forth. Where and how and what have you seen in terms of best practices for having, is it just simply having somebody at the table early who has that perspective, or are there some particular pitfalls that you guys have seen people fall into in terms of things that will get in the way of eventually having trustworthy AI, well-controlled, that sort of thing? I'm just curious to get your perspective.
Well, I can get started. So, our view is that trustworthiness and the risk, governance, controls, compliance types of considerations are something that should be built into the process from the start. But it can be done in a thoughtful way. It can be done in a way that enables and supports accelerated AI development, as opposed to stifling innovation or making it overly cumbersome or overly bureaucratic. And finding that balance between, enabling innovation, but at the same time controlling risks, that's the needle we're trying to thread. But doing it after the fact is very expensive and very risky. And we've seen situations like that where folks would first develop a model, roll it out into the market, and then say, okay, let's look at the performance after the fact as one of our controls. Well, 6 months later, if they realize that the algorithm was avoiding lending to certain zip codes or certain demographics, that's too late, right? That's too late from a legal perspective. The risk's already there. It's also very difficult at that point to go back and kind of redo the entire modeling and model ops process. And so we are advocating kind of looking at every step in the modeling, development, and deployment process, from the ideation, prototyping, data sourcing, implementation, use, operation, monitoring, and kind of building in as much of the controls along the way as possible, and automating and kind of hiding them from the user as much as possible as well, so that it's light. It's not overly cumbersome. It naturally happens. You log in, and you already are given permissions to play with certain data sets in a safe environment, just based on where you sit in the organization. You don't have to go and ask for approval for every little thing that you need to do to model something. But at the same time, there are controls and boxes around, and any sort of confidentiality walls already implemented in the technology, such that if you do need to look over the wall, you do have to get approvals and so on. So kind of keeping it light, but making it embedded from the start is, in my mind, the recipe for success. I don't know, Robin, if you have any views from your perspective.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's no shortage of enforcement actions, complaints, regulators coming on the news and talking about how they encourage innovation in financial services, but that a lot of these sort of automated tools and machine learning, makes them nervous. So there's no shortage of risk. I do, however, believe that a lot of the challenges boil down to who is asking the questions and what questions are being asked. I think that there is a way to appropriately and reasonably ask the questions, and I think when that happens, it leads to really great results and a lot of efficiencies and a lot of good things happening. I do think that folks should be aware that while the U.S. regulatory guidance has not explicitly defined what artificial intelligence is, they have provided a lot of guidance as far as what they think may fall under this. And I think it's good to be aware of that and to operate in as much transparency as you can, with as much documentation as you can, with respect to what you're exactly doing and why the decisions that are being made on your platforms.
Robin, let me pick up on that for a second, and then the same question to all of us, I guess. Can you think of an example of where an institution has kind of rolled out an application, and maybe you've either helped them or advised them through that process, and any lessons learned coming out of that? Just anything that we can share with this group from the actual experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of discussion in the news with some of the most largest technology companies that we know. I think that Ben told a funny story to us as we were getting on the panel about telling someone that they were going to an artificial intelligence panel and them being like, "Oh, the monkeys," it's crazy. So needless to say, I think that we've talked a little bit about trust and trust and trustability, and I think that transparency goes a long way. I think that artificial intelligence is now, here to stay. It's all around us. Anybody who has a phone and an app, I can't open it without my face anymore. But there was obviously a lot of news around there being difficulties with facial recognition, especially with people of color like myself, and it not going as well as it possibly could. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities in this field, but I think that it's making progress, and it's obviously here to stay. I think all the banking apps that I now own use Face ID of some sort. So I think that artificial intelligence is just a part of us. But I do watch the news and see that there are quite a number of actions related to the modeling not being done appropriately and including enough folks of diverse ranges in the programs, as far as who the developers are and who it's being modeled after and for. And I think a lot of it has to do with sort of the history of discrimination in this country, and that we are very, very conscious about what we call protected classes, and folks that may not be the majority in the United States, but still have a right to access, especially to credit and financial services. So I think it's really a challenge. We might not see it as much in other countries because of the way that our framework is set up here in the U.S., but it's something to definitely be vigilant about, that you're not taking a zip code and saying that is the end-all be-all, and anyone outside of that zip code can't be a part of your program, because most likely the zip codes and the way that housing crisis has worked in the United States is that we're not all the most desegregated country in the world.
Yeah, just picking up on that for a second, Robin. One of the things that, just a very practical example for you guys. One of the things that I ran into when I walked in the door, the consumer bank old place, was that there was a heavy leaning toward focusing on affluence. And unfortunately, affluence is one of those places where, because our society is not equal, we haven't come from a good utopian place. It's not a good indicator of sort of a fair and equal society across all kinds of different lines, but race in particular. And so we started looking at who was getting assigned certain customers with different levels of wealth, but also how those customers grew as a result of the assignment with the banker. And one of the things that we found really quickly is if we actually stopped using affluence as the only indicator, but started using things like behavioral segmentation to look at who actually went into a branch, who had regular interactions, and so forth. What products, how many products did they own, all that kind of stuff. We were able to start to find a broader and far more representative group of people who were actually interested in having a relationship with a banker, but they were actually also at the same time, Robin, to your point, they looked more like society at large, not just the people at the very tip top of the wealth spectrum. And so one of my favorite things that I did there was actually getting away from this, you have to be a 1%er to get really great service, and get more into you have to be somebody that values that service and wants to do business with us, and will grow your relationship as a result. And that actually spanned all of the boundaries. So love stuff like that, where we can actually use data to do some good and unravel some of the bias that exists in society, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have. I 100% agree. And one of the most successful things that we always implement is using suggestions or alerts. Whenever we put AI algorithm, we present information to the end user, and then he or she makes the ultimate decision. We can maybe agree or disagree if it's easier to fix bias on a person, but you can, after you do a bias training with examples, you understand, like you reflect on yourself, things that, maybe I used to do that. And you have that click and perhaps change. But always when you can put suggestions, and we avoid so much in terms of regulatory issues and problems of compliance, because who is making the ultimate decision is a person and not a robot.
Well, we have a few minutes left. Let's talk about trust in AI. Why is it so difficult? What should we do to make sure there is trust in AI? I don't know, Rodrigo, if you want to get us going, and then we can all chime in.
Yeah, sure. So in my experience, there's a lot of, concerns about AI, especially in large corporations. Large firms, they move in a different pace. They want to see other markets being successful first. They want to see use cases being proven. They want to see things already happening before they jump in, because of regulations and many other things. And the tradition of long-standing firms. So it's easy to get caught into those risks and concerns, but strategies that I found to avoid that is implement this AI code, right? Talk about AI, discuss about AI, sell AI to your colleagues, and build this community. You see how much difference that makes on itself. And the other thing is talk about numbers, right? If we, in my work colleagues, people in general are worried about jobs and AI replacing jobs. And if you look at the numbers, it's just not true, right? We're in the lowest unemployment rate in the US now, 3.5%. And AI is growing exponentially. So if there is any correlation, it's an inverted one, because AI is going up, production is going up, and employment is going down. So you can't actually match those two numbers.
Yeah, no, I think Rodrigo covered the trust question well.
Yeah, maybe just to wrap it up then, risks. You know, what are the some of the key risks? I know we touched upon a couple, but you know, what should we be on the lookout for from a risk perspective? And I can certainly chime in, but wanted to get you guys started too.
Why don't you start?
Sure. No. So we, like I said, I live in this world at Deloitte where we have this trustworthy AI framework, and we've segmented it into like 6 major categories of risks. You know, the first one we talked about a lot about today, which is bias and fairness. You know, another category is explainability and transparency. We really didn't talk about that too much today, but we need to know what the model is doing and be able to explain it to even know whether it's fair and biased, right? Then another one is responsibility and accountability, making sure that there's this human centricity in everything that we do, that the humans own the result, that there's an adult person, human being in the room that can, you know, make sure that the machine does what it's supposed to do, throw the switch at the right time, modify what it's doing, and so on. You know, the models have to be robust and reliable, and robustness and reliability is not just the traditional sort of MRM model risk dimensions of, you know, the black box doing the right things. It's also about, you know, could it be provoked into doing the wrong thing, either accidentally or maliciously? So robustness is a more advanced concept in AI. Another one is privacy, somewhat unique to AI, but you know, AI models are very data hungry. They will go and they find every data set they can possibly get to and use that to calibrate themselves. Do we have the rights to use the data? Do we have consent, and so on? And then finally, there's this dimension of security and sort of cyber aspects, but the cyber risks are magnified for a lot of AI tools because many of them are customer facing and many of them are learning in real time. And so you can't really hide them in a traditional way behind like 3 levels of firewalls to protect them, right? They have to be exposed, they have to be given some level of autonomy, and as a result, making sure that they are secure takes on an extra level of risk. So that's kind of how I think about it. I don't know if there's anything else that you guys can think about.
Yeah, I would just add one that we don't talk a lot about, which is that this is going to be an unpopular opinion in this room. Most experiences that customers have with artificial intelligence are trash. That struck a chord. If you think about it, like, when's the last time that you believed a chatbot was going to be able to help you? And how many people in this room are working on chatbots or have one, right?
Operator.
Yeah, agent. That's my favorite. Agent or an F-bomb. There are some very, very poor and colorful recordings of me interacting with IVRs. So I think one of the big risks for us as a community is to figure out ways to make sure that what ends up coming out on the other end, whether it's a recommendation to a salesperson or a customer experience or something that gets embedded in the way that they operate, that it actually really is high functioning and not just in kind of the fat middle part of the model, but on the tails. Because if you think about the companies that you hate dealing with the most, and little secret, banks are one, right? Like, don't tell anyone. But literally, banks, cable companies, utilities, the government, sorry for anyone who's here from the public side, so much of what is common is that the importance is on cutting costs, the importance is on automation, and not on how will this actually look and feel and help do the job more effectively. So I think that's a big risk for us, is especially in the early days between now and things like Lambda. How do we make sure that chatbots aren't trash? How do we make sure that these recommendations and insights and so forth aren't just generic and stupid and kind of a waste of time?
Yeah, it's easy to get excited about AI and just start building something that will, in someone's mind, fix things, reduce costs, but it's really, really hard to think about and to actually build something that will enhance and not be detrimental to customer experience or even the firm. So there's no single answer, but getting always to think about customer as the end result, a good customer service.
Yeah, and I think we were talking, I hope this is on. I don't know if it's on even. It is. Okay, phew. I think we were talking about risks, and I think we've really covered all of them. I just want to add in terms of, in addition to risk, I think that you should think about taking corrective actions when problems arise. So, if you, let's say you've taken all of our advice and you've set up this great risk management process and you're doing your testing and you've got your risk accountability officer and you guys are all trained and ready to go and you've got your policies and your procedures and your instructions and you're just doing everything, and you find that there is some bias or fairness or maybe there's been some sort of breach, then what is where I sort of start to see the problems arise. You've got to show that you have taken corrective action for those problems. You can't just wonder if there's a problem or note that there might have been a glitch. You kind of have to say what the next step is there, and documenting that is really, really important, because eventually someone will notice, someone will make a complaint, something will eventually come up, and you want to be able to go back to your records and show that on XYZ you noticed something and you did Y.
Thank you, Robin and all. I think we're just about out of time, maybe a little bit over. So, I don't know if there are any questions in the audience. We're always happy to take them offline as well. And if not, then we'll just close for the day. Thank you very much to the panelists and to AF4. Great seeing all of you guys today, and hope to hear many more interesting panels and discussions in the next couple of days. Thank you.